dealing with JSONs and links. Let's have a look at a few practical ways to work with data in JSON format. Imagine an incoming object in which JSON contains a user ID, first name, and last name. Our task is to update the table with users. To solve that problem, we need to create a new scenario that will handle all the new incoming objects. This scenario will work with the incoming data structure and the new trigger. The first thing we have to do is to get the user ID from the JSON. It can be saved as a context variable, or we can add another field to the incoming data structure. Here, we use the context variable type link and specify the data structure it refers to. In this case, it's the web user table. Now it's time to pull the ID. By the way, don't forget to add comments to the scenario, so you keep it readable and easy to work with in the future. Next, in the Edit Object step, we write data from JSON to our context variable. The field with JSON is called payload. To use the templating tool for JSON, we need to turn off smart inputs for the fields and type payload.id. That last one is the name of the property in JSON. If we look in the documentation, we'll see that there are two ways to handle JSON in the Edit Object step. The first is for simple, flat JSON. That's what we'll use now. We have a JSON with no arrays, and we can work with it using a templating tool. The second way is to use JavaScript. We have to enable coding mode, and then a JSON object, a payload in our case, can be handled like a regular JavaScript object. But for now, let's use the templating tool, because it just works faster. The second step is to check whether there's already a similar object with a user. To do that, we add the condition step. We go to our user via the link and check if its ID is filled in. If it's not empty, that means that such a user already exists. And if it is empty, it means there is no object, so we'll have to create it. In that case, we use the Create Object step. If the object already exists, we'll simply change its fields using the Edit Object step. The scenario stops when both steps are processed. Let's configure the Edit Object step. We change the first name field of the user object our context variable refers to, and we write data from JSON into it using the templating tool to pull that field from JSON. The Edit Object step allows us to change multiple fields at once. In this case, we change both the first name and last name fields. Now let's configure the Create Object step. We create an object in the web user structure. In our current case, we know the ID of the object to be created in advance, so choose the Set ID Manually option. We get our value from the context variable to the ID. It's not necessary to save it anywhere because we already know the ID. The option to generate events or not affects other scenarios. For example, if we want to make some scenario that triggers the creation of a new object, we'll need to enable the Generate Event option. In the second tab, you can configure the field mapping. We save the first name and last name from our JSON into the newly created object. We publish the scenario and run it, and it will react to all new objects. To run an existing object through it, we copy the ID of that object and run it through the scenario via the debugging menu. We look at the logs to check that everything worked well. We can look at the counters on the steps, and we see the path of the object. Let's check our App Users table. A new object with the first and last names was successfully created. It's David Watson. In the expanded object card, we can see all versions of that object, as well as links to the scenario or endpoint that modified or created the object. In our case, we see the scenario and the Create Object step.